The first talk is by Nathan Sprinkle. He's at 2U. He didn't make it, so we're going to be playing you a video that he recorded earlier. What? Yeah, he's alive. Yeah, he didn't make it here. Yeah, we already have one broken arm, but yeah, that's all we have. Right? Okay, go ahead.
I want to talk really quickly about BFFs and some really cool development and design patterns we've found building with them lately. So the first obvious question, what the heck is a BFF? So a BFF is a backend for front end. This is part of a design pattern we've been using to build new experiences that leverage new technologies and are less tightly coupled into edX platform. Let me show you what I mean. So you've probably heard a lot about micro front ends or MFEs. These are React-based applications we're using to build new front end experiences at edX. They are responsible for all the interaction and presentation pieces of the front end. And we've adopted this pattern because it allows us to create experiences as separate apps, which lets us develop them independently, and importantly, without adding bloat to edX platform in the process. Skipping over to the backends, these are the resources and functions needed by our front end. These can include services or data in edX platform, XBlocks, or even external services. We can leverage existing functionality here or extend these backends to provide new functionality to serve the front end. But the meat of our talk is the BFF. This is a small app that lives in edX platform. It has a standalone API space and is purpose-built to service only our front end. Largely, it's in charge of data transform and translation, but there's also a lot of really cool patterns we can use here, and that's what we're going to be talking about. So using a concrete example, recently my team worked on a new front-end experience for staff grading. For this, we needed course info, teams info, and to leverage functionality from XBlocks. While most of the functionality would have been accessible to the front end as is, the front end would have to understand a bunch of different request patterns used across XBlocks and platform. Instead, all that's abstracted behind the BFF, which means we could dramatically reduce the complexity of the front end. It also gave us the flexibility to design our own API that serviced exactly the use case for the front end. And as a final point, again, since this app is isolated from other apps, we could avoid bloating our existing apps. That means if we ever want to change or even remove the experience entirely, it's super easy to do so. Besides the architectural benefits, this also opened up a really nice development pattern. Since we could design our ideal API, we let the front end drive that contract, drive those data shapes. From there, the back end really only cared about filling in any missing functionality. And then it was the job of the BFF to bridge those two gaps between the contract and the built functionality. This let us design more upfront and then split into separate groups to develop and implement them quickly and in parallel. So we had a front end team and different back end groups that were responsible for the different pieces of this. Along the way, another cool idea we came across was the idea of a mock BFF. Now, during early development on the front end, it was possible to mock a lot of the data we needed locally in the front end, things like our students and submissions and grades. But for any level of interactivity and state management, we needed something more. What we ended up doing was creating a mock copy of our BFF. This was a super lightweight view that just ended up serving pre-written data built around our contract shapes. We were then able to write simple interactivity rules like changing that data when updating learner's grade to do that simple state management. All in all, we were able to set this up in an afternoon, super rapid to author this, and test the integration between our front end and our BFF, as well as provide a more interactive environment for testing. Again, best of all, we could also set this up while still developing the real BFF and backends without blocking any of the development work for the front end, and even accelerating that because we could test that early integration. A final cool thing to talk about is that this let us do really slick error handling. The services we used had so many different error patterns. Sometimes an HTTP 200 was a good thing. Sometimes it was a bad thing. Sometimes it got back HTML. Other times it got back JSON. What the BFF let us do is first to catch and transform all of these different error types, and then distill them down to just the classes the front end would care about. We define these error classes with an exception code, not like an English string that we would present, but just a code, an HTTP response code, and we built them to carry additional context if needed. That meant that if we needed to, we could pause in the BFF, pause in an error and get updated state information for the front end. Then we would allow the front end to handle all the error presentation and translation to nicely separate out those concerns from the back end and the BFF. And again, could even update the local app context if we pass that from the BFF. So in summary, we have this architectural pattern of using a micro front end talking through a BFF, the backend for front end, instead of talking directly to the backends it would need. The BFF provides us the ability to purpose build an API, meaning it can be clean, flexible, and extensible to our use case. And since we're moving a lot of the routing and data aggregation that would otherwise have to live in the front end to the BFF, we can dramatically reduce the complexity of our front end. And beyond these architectural benefits, the meat of this is there are some really neat and cool side effects. With the BFF, we can better leverage contract-driven design patterns and independently in separate groups develop towards those contracts. We can build in really nifty error handling, even pausing to update the app state on an error. And finally, we can even build out mock BFFs to test those data shapes, test early integration, and create more interactive test beds. And that's the meat of the talk. If you have any questions or want to chat about any of these ideas, nerd out at all, I'm on both GitHub and Slack at @nsprinkle. And thanks so much for listening. I really appreciate the time.
Now we're going to have another different kind of lightning talk. Braden McDonald from OpenCraft did not make it here. He's alive. But he will be giving his lightning talk from the comfort of his... Are you in a hotel, Braden? I'm not sure if he hears me. Anyway.
I'm in an Airbnb. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can. So go on ahead.
Can you see my slides that say what is completion?
What is completion? We can see it, yeah.
Okay, perfect. All right, so hi everyone, I'm Braden, I'm CTO at OpenCraft. Unfortunately, I got COVID soon after landing in Lisbon, so I'm isolating at my Airbnb until I'm fully recovered. But I'm feeling a lot better now, so hopefully the end is near. Today I want to talk about completion, and I'm going to talk about it from a number of different perspectives, so I'll have to move fairly quickly, but I am around virtually and hopefully in person tomorrow if you have questions. So what is completion? Well, from a learner perspective, completion is these green checks that you see as you go through the course. And they are mostly on the course outline page and at the top of each unit page. As you complete everything in the unit, you get the green check that appears. And these green checks serve two purposes. One, they help you find your way in the course to go back to where you left off when you're resuming the course. And the other thing is they help you make sure you don't miss anything. You don't miss any assignments, you don't miss any videos, you don't miss any content in the course. You can make sure you did the whole thing. Now, one aspect of completion that's worth noting for learners is that completion is tracked at the component level. So each text, each problem, each video, the system tracks whether or not you've completed that component. But the UI only displays the completion at the unit level as a whole. So for example, on the left here, you can see a unit with 3 problems. I completed the 3rd problem, so there's no green check that appears. But on the right, once I complete all of the problems in the unit, then the green check will appear. The reason I mention this is it can sometimes happen that a learner doesn't get the green check appearing on their unit, and it's not clear why that's the case. And usually it's just because somewhere in that unit, there's a component that you haven't fully completed yet, but you won't see individual green checks in it. So you just have to go through the whole unit and make sure that everything is complete. Now, from an author perspective, there's different ways that content in your course gets completed by learners. And it's helpful to be aware of the different ways that that happens. So of the things that you can be completed, one way is that they can be completed on view. And an example of this would be the text component. So the way that this works is the text has to be on the user's screen for at least 5 seconds. So if you have a long unit, the learner will have to actually scroll the page until the text is on their screen, and they'll have to have it on their screen for at least 5 seconds, which is hopefully a proxy for they read the text. And the idea here is that if you just click, 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 click through a whole bunch of units, we don't want it to mark as complete because you haven't actually read anything. So for complete on view, which is like text units or images, you have to actually have them on your screen for a few seconds. Another way that blocks can be completed is on score. So an example of this would be the problem components. Basically, they get marked as complete as soon as you get any score from the problem. It doesn't matter what the score is. It can be 0, it can be 100%, but as long as you get some score, then it will be marked as complete. And then the other way that XBlocks can be marked as complete is a custom criteria. And a good example of this would be the video component. Videos don't get marked on view or on score, but they get marked when you watch the video. And by default, you have to watch pretty much the whole video, 95% of it, and then it will be considered complete. There's other component types, for example, aggregator. So unit is an example of this. It means it's not completed directly, but it's considered complete when all the components within it have been completed. And lastly, some components are not completable at all. And an example of this would be the discussion component. So you don't have to interact with the discussion component at all, and it doesn't factor into the completion of the unit that contains it. It's just completely excluded from the completion calculations. Now, as you can see, the way that completion happens depends on the type of the component or the type of the XBlock. So you currently can't change this as an instructor. If you wanted, for example, discussion to count for completion and to not get a green check until you post a topic or something like that, that's not currently possible, but it would be a nice improvement if anyone is interested in the future. So what is configurable? Well, there's a few things you can do as a system administrator for Open edX to control how completion works. The first one is you can turn completion tracking on or off entirely. So you go to this address that's on the screen as a system administrator, and you can turn it on or off. The important thing to be aware of is that if it's off, no data will be kept whatsoever. So if you later turn it back on, learners will be missing all those green checks from anything they did while it was off. So basically, if you want to have completion on your system, turn it on as early as possible, ideally before any learners are using your courses. The second thing you can configure is the completion by viewing delay. So I talked about how text and images, they get considered complete once they've been on your screen for 5 seconds. If you want to adjust that delay to 1 second or 10 seconds or whatever, you can adjust that. And lastly, the completion video percentage. If you think that the 95% is too strict, you can say that once you've viewed 50% of a video, it will be marked as complete. or whatever completion percentage you want. So you can adjust that. And again, these settings are all for the instance as a whole. You can't really configure them on a course by course basis or anything like that. So most of the completion stuff in the platform is for the learner. You can see those green checks on your own course. But what about for an instructor? Well, by default, the platform only really shows the completion data to learners, and it only tracks it at a component level and the unit level. So at OpenCraft, we built a plugin called the OpenNX Completion Aggregator. And this is useful if you want to prepare reports for instructors or look at analytics for completion of the course as a whole. So you can install this using the instructions you see on the screen here. And it basically runs every hour and adds up the completion of all the individual components in a course, and then it calculates the percent completion at the unit level, at the subsection level, at the section level, at the course level, for every learner and for the course as a whole. So far, the use cases for this have been mostly integrating with other reporting systems. So the big downside of this aggregator is it doesn't have a nice UI, a nice user interface that instructors can use to view the reports. But it has all the data and it makes it available. And if you have your own reporting or analytics system, it's very easy to integrate the completion aggregator. And if anyone is interested in developing a UI with us, that could be a nice improvement in the future. So again, this is not included with OpenNX by default, but it's open source and it's free and it's easy to install. So check it out if you have that use case. Lastly, as an XBlock developer, what can you do to interact with completion if you're making a new XBlock type? Well, if you want your XBlock to be completable, it's really easy. You just import this XBlock completion mode thing here that I'm showing on the screen, and you set it as a class variable on your XBlock, and then you can choose the mode to be completable or aggregator or excluded, and the platform will do the right thing. Or if you want to have a custom completion criteria, and your XBlock does something fancy to indicate when it's been completed or not, you can import this completable XBlock mix-in, mix it into your XBlock class, and then when you want the learner to get the green check for completion, you call this emit completion, and you pass in 1 or 0 to turn the green check on or off. Yeah, so that's completion from learner perspective, author perspective, developer perspective, sysadmin perspective. I'm not there in person, so message me on Slack or give me a shout. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Braden. Esteban, you're up. This is Esteban Echeverri. Did I pronounce that right? From Aulas Neo. And you are going to, yeah, you should.
Hello? Can you hear me? Yes, now you can. Oops. Go full screen. Okay. Hi, everyone. So today I'm going to share our experience hosting online and blended conferences on the OpenEdX platform, right? So 2 years ago, during the pandemic, there were many challenges, especially for organizations or professional associations that they have already plans to do in-person events. And the big challenge was how to solve quickly with usually a low budget, because the budget has already been spent in the venues or the hotels. and also being able to provide an experience where we could have like interactivity at scale with many users, which is one might think of a webinar, right? So many attendees, but the tricky thing here is what you need also many hosts, right? So you need lots of hosts, lots of attendees, and interaction. So that was one of the challenges, right? So our response to this was doing some customizations to OpenEdX. So we built a new case use for this case, and I'm gonna explain a little bit how we did it. So first, the first step in this case is that you need to understand the dynamics of the event. This means understanding the amount of attendees, the number of hosts, right? Sometimes there are lots of hosts. How many people the organizations or the organizations have in the staff that can support the event. Also, how many tracks, how many simultaneous rooms or sessions, the sessions dynamics. We're gonna talk about this next, and also which is the plan to support the hosts and the attendees in the event, right? So this slide is very important because this is gonna trigger the configuration and scenarios in the platform, right? So we need to understand. We need to make all these questions at the organizers, right? So are they gonna have interactive sessions? Are they gonna have keynotes? The keynotes, they're gonna be all remote, the speakers. Do they want to have chat interaction? Do they want to have a small breakout rooms? Do they need roundtables? Will they have pre-recorded talks? So all these questions are essential to be understood at the beginning, right? So that then we can allocate the different resources, right? So then we go and take the next step, that it's building the configuration of building the site, right? So another important point was the enrollment, whether they are per invitation only or if they have to pay to access the event, right? So if they pay, you need to configure some e-commerce features. Then you have to organize the tracks and the sessions. We set up the events gallery view. We're gonna see this in a minute. Also, set up all the synchronous components and the staff support tools, right? So here, this is a customizations we did. The customization we did that really helped, especially all attendees, to manage their online experience and navigate the event, right? So how this one is made, behind all these images and information from the sessions is Studio, right? So we develop a dynamic front-end view that basically links all the each section and the title and the name of each session to an image that is in an S3 bucket, and then it's presented. And then it's presented here, right? So let's say we want to change a session, right? This one is not .9, and this is here. No, this is not the speaker. This is wrong. Or this speaker now is not in day 1 or in day 2. We have to move it to day 4. So we just come to Studio. We move like the block, right? And that's going to be dynamically adjusted in the gallery view, right? So then we need to set up the synchronous setup, which is the tools we use were Zoom, basically. So we added the LTI component and also the iframe component, depending on the appropriate section. And we defined 2 accesses, right? So we need an attendee access, and then we need a moderators room, right? In the case of the moderators, moderators were able to access to a room, and in one of these rooms you have the LTI component, so they could start the meetings, right? and enter the Zoom meeting as host with all the host privileges. Then we set up the attendees access, which is the gallery view, right? And there, each assistant were navigating the gallery, and they click on the session, so they can see the session. There's a pop-up that sends them directly to the Zoom meeting, right? So one option is having the pop-up. Here we have the session. Another option, here again, they enter the session and they open the link. This is automatically, and then they go to one session. They want to change the session. They close. They go to the other one, and they can choose which session they want to be in. In some other cases, we set up like the LTI view in the attendees view. In that case, usually it's like a bit more advanced users. Sometimes they don't know where to click, so we do that. For the sessions, there are broadcasting sessions, right? So you have the speakers, but they don't want to have interaction with the attendees. We've embedded a video streaming block, which is this one's especially used when it's a paid event, so that they don't share the Zoom link, right? So because here it's restricted by domain. And then we build the support channels, right? This is the support channels are a really key component of these experiences, because when you have live sessions with 100 or 90% of the people online, especially hosts, there are unexpected situations that they need to be solved, right? So there has to be a support team. Our experience, our suggestion is having maybe an IM, WhatsApp or an IM support, and also there's a possibility of adding like a chat in the website for the attendees. So we've experienced with many. These are some of the examples of amount of attendees, right, on sessions running in this environment. And again, the interesting thing about here is that half of these attendees, in many of these cases, they were also hosts, right? So there were lots of hosts in these events, and everyone was working from home. So it was a bit of a challenge, and this configuration really helps like the auto administration. Well, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Esteban. Did you help out organizing the virtual track here with this? Next up, my colleague Jenna Makowski at TCRL. She's going to be introducing the OpenEdX roadmap.
Is this right? Yeah. I think I've been talking more in the last 3 days than I have for the last year. My voice is starting to... Okay, so this is going to be a bit of a different talk than the last 3. So I mentioned in the state of OpenEdX yesterday, one of our first projects together as a community, I think, is important, is putting together an OpenEdX product roadmap that is unique to the project, thinking about OpenEdX as an end-to-end project or platform. And so the first thing I want to say about the idea for a roadmap is that I think this is no ordinary roadmap. This is kind of a unique, interesting situation, and something that we have the opportunity to creatively think about how we want to execute this and what we want it to do for ourselves as a community. And I hope this link will work. So we've started on this at TCRL, and with some feedback from folks at OpenCraft and from Alice Nino and from 2U edX. But I want to start just by sort of giving an overview of what it currently looks like. So I see this as sort of a beta project. It exists in GitHub. So we're using a board, like a traditional Kanban board for this. And the reason I think, one of the first reasons I think it's kind of atypical is that it kind of spans a wide range of steps or stages. So we have what we call this ideation stage or ideation pool. So these are, we've just begun to compile ideas from the community. And this is a project that was started actually, I think 2 years ago by Ed. And a number of members of the community just kind of got together and had a brainstorming session of like what features are the most important for the community. And I think there were some opportunity briefs written, and then those projects just kind of sat in a board on Jira for a while. Some of them may have moved a bit. But I started by pulling over all of those onto this board, so we just have them in one place. And then the rest of these columns are beginning to compile work from across the community in terms of what's in discovery phases, what is in the backlog. This is actually kind of a representation of the Tcrl backlog at the moment. It's just, like I said, a beta thing. And then in planning, in progress. So what is the work that's currently being done that would be contributed to the project? And then the idea is that we would have the ability to look and see like what is intended to be or what will be shipped in each named release. And so from kind of a high level, the idea here is that anybody would be able to go to this board and track what can we expect in each release going forward. So again, this is sort of beta version. I'm just sort of putting this out there as a potential outline. So come back here. So what are the goals of the roadmap? So I think in the short, and I want to come back to this same, where's the, there we go. The same framework or model that I introduced yesterday during the State of OpenEdX, in that I think the roadmap kind of sits in this product side of the product management framework. But I think in terms of short term, the goal for the roadmap should just be to simply document all of the work that's happening across the ecosystem that will be contributed to the platform. And so this is inclusive of 2U edX. This is inclusive of the entire community, all the providers who are contributing code, and inclusive of Tcrl as well. So the idea is that we simply want to capture and create a view of work that will be part of OpenEdX. I'm sorry, so work that is in planning and then work that is currently in flight as well. And there's a couple of reasons why I think this is actually not kind of an ordinary roadmap, right? When you think about a roadmap for a product in any sort of context. The first is that it's ecosystem wide, right? Like we're trying to capture work that's happening from 20, 30, 40 or more contributors at the same time. I think it has an inverted starting point as well. So we're starting from the work that is already in progress, right? Which is sort of atypical. And at this point, the work is driving the roadmap. So we're using the work to create the roadmap. Ideally, I think we want to get to a point, maybe a year from now, maybe 2 years from now, where the roadmap is actually driving or helping to guide the work. But I think it's a starting point. This idea of kind of aggregating things is where we need to start, or where we are at the moment. And so at the moment, I'm not even sure that a roadmap is the right word for it. And maybe collectively we can come up with another term that makes sense. It's kind of like a directory of current contributions. But I think this is the starting point for it. It feels like the right starting point. And so then that's the question. So if we're focusing now on just collecting contributions and creating kind of a directory, how do we get to the point where we can shift that inversion? And again, I mentioned this a bit yesterday, but I think long term, there's a couple of things. So it's about coalescing around maybe some shared product narratives or shared strategies. I don't think there's a single one, right? Like there's way too many diverse use cases for this. But I think if we can at least have a view of what the current work is, we can start to see where there are patterns or connections and understand where there are workflows that may intersect around a shared goal or a shared use case for the product. And then the second way that I think we can get to this inverted point is to start to build community-driven processes to help run through some of these iterative frameworks that guide a product management process. So the vehicle for this, again, I think is the product working group. And my thought is that this product working group can help to review design specs, for example, review discovery work, and begin to provide recommendations for, how can we build these things in a way that aligns with the broader product strategy, as well as look at the roadmap kind of holistically and start again to see patterns where there might be connective points between projects. And I think we at Tgrel have the role then to help facilitate making those connections concrete. That makes sense. So why do we need a roadmap? I think there's quite a few reasons. One, I think, is that we can just look at what product use cases or areas of the platform have been collectively prioritized for investment by the community. Again, it's about finding patterns, it's about finding areas of overlap. Concretely, like what features can we expect in the next release? Ideally, starting to get ahead of that question rather than waiting until the release is done and closed. Somebody has a question. We want to invest in this new enhancement. Like, is anyone else interested in investing there? Is there already work that's been done in the discovery kind of phase to answer that question? Similarly, has work on a different issue been completed already? What was the scope and approach taken to an issue? Or we've already done some work on a project and we want to advance it, but we can't do it alone. Are there other partnership opportunities? I think having this roadmap as a living document that we can use to answer these questions would be helpful for everyone across the community. So I touched on this a little bit briefly. I wasn't sure if I had internet, so I had a screenshot of this. But in terms of how it's organized, I'll start from the back this time, so we have sort of two views of it. Ideally, I think it'd be great if we could get to a point where we have a comprehensive list of things that are being shipped in each release. And I want to mention too that I think the view of the roadmap is at the initiative level, right? We're not tracking stories here. We're not tracking even epics. The idea here is just to get a view at the high level of what is coming in each release, why it's important and what the impact is. That's it. The granular work is being tracked in your own roadmap. So we have a list of all the things coming in each release, a status for all of the kind of in-flight work, so things that are in progress. This is what I would like us to actively start building together now. So if you have work that you'll be contributing to the platform, in a moment I'll talk about how you can actually get it on here. And then in planning, so work that's in discovery phase, design phase, again, to sort of track that at a high level so that we have a sense of what's coming down the pipeline. Backlogs for big projects, I think where it makes sense to just have a view of that. Discovery work. And then this is, I think, where there can be a huge opportunity for the product working group to come in and help to drive the roadmap in sort of, again, in that process of shifting, inverting the roadmap from simply a aggregation of material to an actual strategic document. We can think about putting processes and frameworks together to collectively prioritize work where it makes sense and to maybe move some of these ideas that have been sort of floating around in this pool for 2 years or more into actionable items. And so this is, I think, one of the major areas that the product working group can start to look at. And so how does the roadmap fit into more of an end-to-end life cycle? This is another recycled slide from the presentation. But I see it again as sort of the artifact that holds the end-to-end product management framework together. So the roadmap kind of sits again on this left side of the product management double diamond framework, along with all of the documentation that happens sort of prior to technical implementation. So all of the market feedback, user stories, persona work, MVPs, design docs. And in addition to the roadmap, at the moment, we have a wiki space that we're kind of, I think Tgrel's experimenting with maybe having a wiki space to house this. Not sure if that's the right solution yet. Again, maybe something for the product working group to think about. But this is just sort of a sense of context where does this fit. And again, the idea of having kind of these groups to drive the processes that will enable the product roadmap to come to life. And this is a kind of like an ideal overview of maybe how I see this process working with Tgrel. And I'm going to kind of go through kind of a use case. We're sort of experimenting with this now. So currently I was sort of working on just playing around with, so I think there's a shared interest in the idea of modularity. Obviously, modularity is a big project. But this is from the perspective of how do we shift the course authoring process so that you don't only have to author from the top down, rather, but you can start with some sort of core learning objective and then sequence together pieces of content that will get you to that learning objective. So Dave Ormsby at Teakrill is doing some discovery work around a prototype for an architecture learning core. That's connected with another discovery project that I think OpenCraft has done a number of years ago. Maybe we sort of revived it, looking at atomic learning units, which I think is the sort of, in Dave's words, actually, it's like the authoring sister to the learning core. So we've got this LMS discovery work going on. We've had some discovery work around autonomous learning objects. Those two need to connect, right? And so if we had a roadmap to document that discovery work, we could start to make those connections. And then using that discovery work together, we could work on coming up with some sort of like MVP use case for this to define what the requirements could be. So bringing in that process and tying in some sort of faculty user focus group to define what that looks like. And so again, once we get to the MVP, we're kind of at this stage of the Double Diamond framework. Designing specs to support that MVP, I think bringing the product working group in to help review those specs, to help guide those specs, getting to the point where we have an agreed upon spec that works for Open edX. And then from that point, going through building a backlog, iterating and executing. So again, this is just sort of a kind of a play experimental use case. Nothing is ever this linear, right? But I thought it would be fun to kind of play around with what this would look like in real life. And so how can we go about building this together? We'll be sharing the slide, but there is so on this wiki space, I've added some documentation actually on how you can go about contributing so again, the first goal is to just capture, right, all of the ideas. We want to know what's currently in progress, currently in flight that will be contributed. And so there's some documentation here about how to do that. But in a nutshell, very quickly, there's an issue template in GitHub. Oops, now I have to sign into GitHub to get there. But there's an issue template, so it's super straightforward. If you have a GitHub account, you just go in. All we're asking for is like a brief description of the project, a description of the impact. If you have a sense of if there's epics or milestones, just a quick list of what those are, and a sense of the timeline, and that's all. And we will continue this conversation in the product working group tomorrow. So thank you.
We still have some time left, so if you have questions for Esteban or Jenna, there you go. Let's record this. So.
I have a question for Jenna. Who is the one responsible to decide which of these features in the roadmap are actually taken into development?
Also, at the moment, we're kind of looking at capturing the current in-flight works, right? So that's work that's already in development, and that's been a decision made by the contributor, right? Going forward, this is the big question, and I think this is where the product working group can help to look at the whole ecosystem and pull together data and provide some sort of framework for how we arrive at that decision. But we don't know yet. This is a process that we define together, I think, and that's what's so exciting about this.
Hi, my name is Natalie. Okay, I have a dream so that my clients, once they ask me something, and I can tell them like, that will be implemented in Open edX in 2 years or in 1 year. So please wait, hold still, don't customize anything, it will be there. So when do you think, I know that you mentioned 1-2 years, but maybe you can comment something. When do you think that may become true? That, roadmap before the development. Okay,
ideally yesterday. It really, this is a project that we want to just start building now. And so I think the more everybody can add your current contributions to the roadmap, the more we can just we could get this off the ground, in a month if everybody was, able to put their current contributions up and get a sense of where they align. I realize it's not always straightforward to it's January. We'll know this will come in nutmeg. That's not how these processes work, right? but that, yeah, I think it'll be iterative, I guess, is the answer. And the idea is that those released in columns will probably grow and evolve. And so if you look at it now, it might look different than it looks a month from now. But the idea is that that would be the source of truth that you could go to answer those questions.
All right, we're out of time. Thank you, Jenna. That's it. Thank you for coming.